All right, to this very serious slide, kind of a somber way to start off this message, but you may remember this story in the news on Palm Sunday in St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria, Egypt. There's a security guard named Nassim Fahim, and he noticed a very suspicious-looking man wandering into St. Mark's Cathedral, and so Fahim directed him towards a perimeter metal detector, which is an unfortunate necessity in the Christian church in Egypt. Well, the suspicious-looking man was indeed a suicide bomber, and he detonated. And Fahim, the security guard, was undoubtedly the first innocent to die in the blast, but his actions saved the lives of dozens of Christians inside the church. Well, here's an amazing thing, that after the attack, Fahim's widow, with the now fatherless children sitting by her side, was interviewed by Egypt's most famous talk show host, a Muslim. And millions of viewers across the airwaves of Egypt marveled with the host when the widow said on national television these words, "I am not angry at the man who did this. I am not angry at the man who did this. In fact, I'm telling him, may God forgive you. And we also forgive you. Believe me, we forgive you." And the talk show host sat there in stunned silence for 12 seconds. 12 seconds is an eternity on live television. He could not believe the words he heard. He finally leaned forward, searching for response, and he stammered out these words. The Copts, C-O-P-T-S, the Coptic Christians is what he meant. The Copts of Egypt are made of steel, he said. The Christians of Egypt are made of steel. If it were my father, he said, I could never do this. I could never speak words of forgiveness. But this is the faith of the Christians. How great is the forgiveness they have. It's an amazing story. The widow in this story and countless thousands of other suffering Christians across the globe are really amazing examples, not only to us of Christ-like response to persecution, to suffering, and just amazing examples of Christ-like response when life gets tough. But there are also examples to the world, a world which looks at the way Christians respond to difficulties. Christians respond to adversity. Christians respond to persecution even, and say, what is this? Christians are made of steel. I could not do what Christians do. I could not say what Christians say, but this is the Christian faith. Wouldn't it be amazing if that were true of us? That the way we respond to adversity, the way we respond to difficulty, the way we respond to even persecution is something to which the world looks and responds, I could not do this, but this is their faith. They are made of steel. So this morning we're beginning a summer journey in a message series entitled A New Perspective. Life is hard. God is good. It's often difficult for us to hold those two truths simultaneously. We often think, life is hard, God is not good, right? Or God is good, but that's only true when life is easy. But there are two truths we're going to be unpacking this summer. It's a new perspective that both life is hard and God is still good. And this journey is going to take us through the New Testament, the last few chapters of the New Testament book of 1 Peter, this letter we've seen in a previous message series that we did earlier this year. The letter of 1 Peter was written to a group of Christians who, much like the modern-day Coptic Christians in Egypt, were being targeted for their faith. They were being persecuted. They were being executed for their faith. And so this letter has a lot to say about navigating tough times. And our point of connection with the letter of 1 Peter is this. We may not be literally taking bullets for our faith, but we take bullets, don't we? We take some metaphorical bullets in life. And it certainly seems to me that as the landscape of our culture is growing more and more hostile towards Christianity, we might face the day where we take, a little bit more intense bullets, maybe in our lifetimes. But whether or not what we're facing this moment is literal bullets, I think we all face difficulties in life, right? Life is hard. And sometimes the difficulties we face are difficulties that are imposed on us by people who don't like us. They don't like us because we're Christians, right? And so we take some bullets. And so we want to see, what does this letter of 1 Peter say to us about holding on to the goodness of God in the midst of life difficulties? And this is why this is important for me as a pastor of this church family. We need to continually be asking the question, how are we going to respond? How are we going to be when life gets hard? How are we going to be when people like us or dislike us more and more because of our Christian faith? How are we going to be and respond as Christ followers? And 1 Peter gives us a blueprint, a template for what the Father expects and wants of his children when life gets hard. And so I'm going to pick up in the second chapter of 1 Peter, verse 11, where we read these words. Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your souls, against your very souls. I'm going to pause here just to make two observations, really in this introductory verse to this section we're unpacking right now. When we as Christ followers are called temporary residents and foreigners, our Heavenly Father is just reminding us that this is not where we belong. This place, this is not our home. We don't belong here. And so that means that the way that the world responds to difficulties, the way the world responds, the way the world is going to be, is not the way that we're going to be, because this is not where we're from. We're from someplace else. We belong someplace else. The Father wants us to be and to respond in ways in which the world will marvel when they see us. What's the deal with these Christians? They are made of steel. We wouldn't do what they do, but this is their faith because we don't belong here. And then verse 11 goes on to tell us then, as people who don't belong, as temporary residents and foreigners, that we're not to respond to hard times. We're not to respond to difficulties. We're not to respond to the things that happen in life by choosing these worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. Now, worldly desires, that might bring a couple things to our mind, but I'd like to suggest to you that this is a pretty expansive and broad category of ways that we are not to respond. He's talking about worldly desires, these natural knee-jerk reactions that come to us that are from this place, not from that place. All right? Worldly desires, these natural knee-jerk reactions, and the letter is telling us when we choose these natural knee-jerk reactions, it actually wages war against our very souls. It does damage to us when we choose these natural knee-jerk reactions. Well, what are some of the things we naturally do when life is hard, when things get difficult? Well, we have some natural knee-jerk reactions towards other people that we often choose. Retaliation is a pretty common one. Retaliation says, hey, life is hurting me right now. Life has hurt me. I have the right, I'm entitled to hurt you. I can hurt people around me because I've been hurt. Or you're hurting me, I'm going to hurt you back. You want a piece of me? Come on, right? Isn't that the way we naturally respond? You disrespect me, I'll disrespect you back. You dishonor me, I'm going to dishonor you back. You treat me unfairly, you slander me, I am going to be cruel to you, and I will dishonor you back. And 1 Peter is saying, no, Don't react in these natural, worldly, knee-jerk reactions because it actually hurts you. It makes your own soul a battleground. Another way we naturally respond is we sin. It's like, life is hard right now. Life is stinky right now. I deserve a little bit of self-indulgent sin. I'm going to just sin a little because I deserve it. Awkward silence right now, right? First Peter is telling us, no, this natural knee-jerk reaction to the difficulties in life actually hurts you. It doesn't help you. It makes your own soul a battleground. And then deceit is another knee-jerk reaction. Oh man, this situation is going to be painful if it plays out the way it's going to play out if the truth is known. But if I twist the truth, if I deceive a little bit, I'm going to dodge a bullet here. And that's the kind of natural knee-jerk reaction we take towards life's difficulties that 1 Peter tells us, no, don't do that. These knee-jerk reactions actually make your own soul a battleground. It inflicts damage on yourself. So anybody know any of these? No, nobody? Okay, 2 people. All right. So we're actually going to spend more time on this next week. But the point is these ways we naturally respond do damage to us. All right, and with that then, there are some common knee-jerk reactions to difficulty in life that are actually aimed at God. And these are all just various kinds of reactions of disbelief. And so when life is difficult, when inexplicable things happen, it's like, what? God must be punishing me. Why is this happening, right? You know that one. God has abandoned me. God is failing me. God is wronging me. And why? Just because difficult things are happening, right? Don't we go there? Yeah, we do. We do. And again, 1 Peter is reminding us, hey, when life gets tough, these knee-jerk reactions of disbelief in the Heavenly Father's attitude, disbelief in the Heavenly Father's orientation towards you, it makes your soul a battleground. Don't go there. Don't go there. And so, as temporary residents and foreigners, as children of another realm, our Father wants us to respond towards Him in difficulties, and our Father wants us to respond towards others in the midst of difficult times in ways that are different from these natural and worldly knee-jerk reactions that actually do damage to ourselves. And so, what are the ways that the Father would call us to respond? And so what we're going to see in the rest of our time are just several kinds of responses that the Father is looking for from His children, the kinds of responses to which the world says, what's with these Christians? They are made of steel. We wouldn't do what they do. All right, so we're going to look at just kind of this laundry list of responses to life's difficulties. And then what I did is actually divide this message in half. And next week, what we're going to see is at the end of this section, we're given the reasons why and the how we make the kinds of choices. So I just wanted to give you the lay of the land. We're going to talk about the choices, and next week, how and why we make those choices. All right, so what is the Father looking for us when life gets difficult? Picking up in verse 12. So be careful then, when life is hard, to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God when He judges the world. And so when life is hard, the Father just simply wants us to live properly. Say, live properly. Yeah, that just as simply means good conduct. Do well. Behave well. Behave honorably, regardless of how the people around us, our unbelieving neighbors, are treating us. And it says, even if they accuse you of doing wrong. I don't know about, so the implication is false accusation. I don't know about you guys, but this is like a button pusher for me, personally. When somebody says, this is what you did, it's like, I did not. Does anybody know that one? I hate that. That'll keep me up at night more than anything else. You guys can relate. I hate being accused of wrongdoing. So how do we respond? Well, we all know our knee-jerk reactions, right? We want to put out all the brush fires. We want to call every person, set them straight about the truth, right? Or I've talked about this before, but have you ever done this when you replay this imaginary conversation with that person and you're presenting the evidences, this is how it is, and in your imagination you get to that point where they say, oh, I get it, right? That's such a wonderful fantasy. Because in real life, does it ever happen? It doesn't. So how do we respond when the people around us are accusing us of stuff we're not doing? The Father says, live properly, just do well, and be honorable. Just choose to do well. And when we do that, the world around us looks at us as what is with Christians? They're made of steel. I could never do what Christians do, but this is their faith. So live properly and honorably. Now, what I love about this verse is we are given a reason why should we live properly when life is tough and the people around us are accusing us of things we're not doing. It says, for when we do this, when we live honorably before them, they will give honor to God when he judges the world. And there's only two different things that this can mean. It's either that our unbelieving neighbors, these people who have falsely accused us, are going to stand before God on Judgment Day, and he's going to relive the true story for them, and they are going to go, oh, oops. And that'll be wonderful. That'll be wonderful when it happens. But there's another way to understand what is being said here, is that ultimately, when they have seen our honorable behavior, when we have still chosen to live respectfully and properly, even when we've been mistreated, even when we've been maligned, that they will stand before God and give honor to God as believers in God, as worshipers of God, because the way we responded led them to faith in this great God of Christians. Does it make sense? Honorable lives producing Christ worshipers ultimately for eternity. Right? So let's revisit St. Mark's Cathedral. On the night of the bombing, there was an Orthodox Christian priest, an Egyptian Orthodox Christian priest by the last name of George. He spoke to a congregation in Cairo, and his words were broadcast over Egyptian television as well. And he actually spoke to the terrorists that were behind this. It was the Islamic State of Libya who were behind the recent bombings in Egypt. He spoke to the terrorists, and this is what Priest George had to say. He said, I love those who did this crime. What an amazing statement. I love those who did this crime, and I long to talk to you about our Christ, to tell you how wonderful he is. An amazing statement. What you may not understand is the culture in the Middle East is a culture that's based on honor. It's a culture based then on shame. And most importantly then, the demand for revenge when someone has been shamed. The demand for revenge. And that's why for thousands and thousands of years, really dating back to the dawn of recorded human history, people in the Middle East have been killing each other and then killing each other back and then kill each other back and back for thousands of years. Because that is their culture. It's a culture of honor, a culture of shame, a culture of retaliation. But what is happening in this current climate of terrorism against Christians in particular, that many across the Middle East are witnessing this thing called Christian forgiveness. And Muslims are asking themselves, what power is this? We've never seen this before in all of our history. What power is this? And the testimony of the followers of Christ is like a domino sweeping across the Middle East. And Christians like the widow of the security guard, Nassim Fahim, are winning over Muslims. Are winning over Muslims because they're saying, what power is this? Christians are made of steel. How great is this forgiveness they have? I could never do what they do, but this is their faith. That sounds a lot to me like they will give honor to God when they see our honorable behavior. So, when life is difficult, when the people around us are making life difficult, the Father empowers us to still continue to choose not these natural worldly knee-jerk reactions of retaliation and sin and deceit and mistrust for Him, but to choose instead this otherworldly response of continuing to live properly, to live honorably, of choosing to do good even when we are wronged, and wrongly wronged at that. Make sense? All right. Let's continue. In verse 13, we read these words, for the Lord's sake, there's a reason right here. Do this for the Lord's sake. Submit to all human authority. Say all human authority. For the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king as head of state or the officials he has appointed. For the king has sent them, them being the officials he has appointed, to punish those who do wrong and to honor those who do right. We spent time on this verse last fall, but here's the punchline from an entire sermon, is the Father wants us to be obedient, law-abiding, authority-honoring citizens. All right? Submit to all human authority. The Father wants us to be obedient, authority-honoring citizens, even when that's difficult. Anybody have difficulty honoring government authority these days? Yeah, okay. Employment authorities? Nobody there, right? See, if you remember, as a matter of fact, we have the next slide. We spent an entire weekend on this verse alone. If we go to the next slide, this is a little shameless promotional ad. Listen to this sermon, Christian Citizens, dated September 18th, last fall. I spent an entire Sunday on this verse. And what we saw there is when Peter wrote these words that we're reading in this letter, the king of the Roman Empire that his readers lived under was Nero. And you remember Nero? He was a scumbag. The worst politician you can think of right now is a saint compared to Nero. He was a paranoid, psychopathic, murderous pervert who burned Christians on posts to light up his garden at night. That's the king. Peter himself, who wrote these words, respect the king, honor the king, would die at Nero's hands. All right? Respect the king, he wrote, just the same. All right? Anyway, I'm not going to preach that entire sermon. Go listen to that. It's really, really good stuff. But the punchline is simply this. No matter how tough it gets, no matter how tough it gets in our country, no matter how tough it gets in whatever situations we find ourselves in under authorities who make life difficult for us, the Father empowers us to make a different kind of choice than our knee-jerk reactions. And that's to be respectful towards authorities, even when those authorities may not necessarily deserve our respect. Understood? Now we'll come back to this in a second. Let's pick up in verse 15. It's God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. So again, this is people who are making stuff up about us. Oh, I hate when that happens. So we can connect with this passage. It's not just about literally taking bullets or suicide bombers for your faith. This is just taking false accusations. I think we can all identify with this. All right, so it's God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. For you are free, and yet you're God's slave, so don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. That's I'm being mistreated, I'm going to sin. He's like, no, don't do that. Respect everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, and respect the king. And so these verses are really repeating the same instructions that have been given to us as children of another place. All right? Live honorably. Even when people accuse you falsely of doing stuff you didn't do, choose honor. Live honorably. Don't use difficulties. Don't use tough circumstances as an excuse to indulge in sin. Respect everyone. Even if they disrespect you, you respect them back. And to respect the king. And in our context, that'd be respect the president. Even if you think that he's not a respectable person, respect the president. Nero didn't deserve any respect, but Peter said, respect the king. We respect our president. That's just what we do because we're different than everybody else. We're from another place. That's all review, but here in verse 17, there's a couple new commands, a couple new expectations that our Father gives to us. He says, respect everyone, love the family of believers, and fear God. Love the family, fear God. Love the family, fear God. Two new commands. So this first phrase I'm going to look at is in fear God. We looked at this earlier this year when we saw this phrase in the first chapter of 1 Peter. And if you remember, what we saw there is in this letter, in this book, the fear of God means to worship Him, to trust Him, to love Him. Not like live in terror of a God who's going to give us the smackdown. Just trust God is what fear of God means in 1 Peter. Trust Him. And so when life is going well, we fear God. We trust Him. We love Him. We worship Him. And in the context of this book, when life is not going well, when you're getting the smackdown for things that you don't deserve, when it's inexplicable difficulties in life, also trust God. Also worship Him. Love Him just the same. Because life is hard, but God is still good. You understand? We don't cave in to this natural response, this knee-jerk reaction that when life is hard, that we start believing, God is unhappy with me. Right? God is punishing me. God is out to get me. God has abandoned me. Bad things are happening. You ever been in one of those life circumstances where things are going wrong and then something else happens and you want to do this? Really? What? Really? I needed this now like I needed a hole in my head, right? That's just our knee-jerk reaction. You're not good. You've abandoned me. You're failing me. You are wronging me right now. And this verse is telling us, no, when life gets tough, fear God, meaning trust Him, even still. Love Him, even still. Worship Him, even still. All right, so that's the first phrase, fear God. But further, in the midst of these inevitable storms of life and the inexplicable storms of life, we also love the family of the Father. Elbow the person next to you and say, this means you. Right? Love the family. Love the family, context of this book, love the family when it's hard to love the family. Right? Love the family when life is difficult. Love the family especially when life is difficult. There was a book written some years ago. It's actually sitting on one of my bookshelves somewhere. It has a title, something to the effect, I love God. It's the church I don't like. Right? Right? We laugh because we know exactly what that means. Right? But listen to this. When 1 Peter 2:17 says, love the family of believers. Love the family, trust the Father. Love the Father's family and trust the Father. It's telling us that this attitude that says, I love the Father, but I don't love his family, that attitude just simply translates as, I don't love the Father. That's what it really means. I love the Father, but not the Father's family, just simply means I don't love the Father. We can't love the bridegroom and hate his bride. Right? We can't say to Jesus, Jesus, I really love you, but I hate your stupid wife. I don't think that goes over with Jesus. It wouldn't go over with me, right? I don't think it goes over with Jesus, the bridegroom and his bride. I don't think it goes over with the Father and his family. So when life is difficult, when tough things happen, when tough things happen even within this room, 1 Peter tells us we're going to respond differently than our knee-jerk reactions because we're from another world. And there's power for us to be made of steel and to choose something different and to love the family, even when it's hard to love the family, and to trust the Father as we're loving the family. You see? You understand? You understand. Continuing in verse 18 then, we read this. So you who are slaves must submit to your masters and do it with all respect. Do what they tell you, not only if they are kind and reasonable, but even if they are cruel. And so culturally, obviously a very different culture than what we live in now. So culturally, the way this translates to us is the Father wants us to be great employees. The Father just wants us to be great employees. The Father wants his children to do what our bosses ask us to do. Did you hear that? Why do we do that? Because we don't belong here. We respond differently. We're made of steel. And we do what our bosses ask us to do with respect, with all respect. And this expectation that the Father has, this empowerment that the Father gives us, applies when our bosses are fine people and when they're not so fine, when they are cruel. It's kind of a tough one, isn't it? Let me say a little caveat right here. This verse is not telling us that we have to stay in a situation where we're being treated cruelly. Right? If your boss is treating you cruelly, you have the freedom before God to say, you know what, I don't think that I want to work here anymore. The expectation is not for us to endure cruelty, but just simply that when we are serving under that authority, when we are serving under that boss, we do our job. We do our job, and we do it well, and we do it with all respect. Because we respond differently. We're from another place. And we respond in a way that the world says, Christians are made of steel. I wouldn't do what they do, but this is their faith. Finally then, picking up in verse 19, we read the truth about the Father's orientation towards us when life is hard. Here's the truth about the Father's orientation. Verse 19, God is pleased. God is pleased. When conscious of his will, you patiently endure unjust treatment. God is pleased when we patiently endure injustice. I love verse 20. Now, of course, you get no credit for being patient if you're beaten for doing wrong. Meaning, if you screwed up and you take a beating, you deserve that one. It's on you. That's on you. But if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. And so this verse is telling us that rather than attributing difficulties in life, rather than attributing ill treatment by others towards us as evidence of that God's displeasure is upon us, as evidence that God is somehow distant from us, his children should rather understand our difficult circumstances as an opportunity to walk in the Father's pleasure, to walk in the Father's smile, to experience that we're doing it well, we're responding like people from someplace else. And the Father just smiles on that. In fact, this is really interesting. The word pleased here, say pleased, is actually literally the word grace. Now, when you try to translate that, it sort of doesn't make sense. For God is grace. When conscious of his will, you patiently endured unjust treatment. And then jumping down, but if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God's grace is with you. Right, this verse is telling us that when we're going through tough times, we're not walking in the Father's displeasure. We are walking in grace. We are walking in the Father's smile. Grace abounds, Christ follower, in our difficulties. Grace is not limited. Grace is not withdrawn in our difficulties. Grace abounds. And so it's interesting to me, there's really two different ways that these words can be unpacked. The English it struggles to capture the original language. So let me give you two different ways you might understand the way this verse reads. All right, I'm getting a little bit nerdy here on you. All right, the first way we can understand this then is what I just said. When we patiently endure and when we continue to choose to do good, even when we're being treated unfairly, that the Father's grace is being poured out upon us. We are the recipients of abundant grace from the Father when we choose not our knee-jerk reactions, but when we choose to do it well, to live honorably, to live properly. Grace is upon us. And so we walk in the Father's grace when we patiently endure. And so that's the first way this could be understood. But a second way this could be understood is that when we patiently endure, when we continue to choose to do good, even when we're being treated unjustly, that the Father's grace is also being poured out through us. The Father's grace is being poured out through us. We're not only the recipients of abundant grace when life gets hard, but we're also the channels of abundant grace when life gets hard. And even channels of abundant grace to those very people who are mistreating us. Channels of abundant grace to which they will sit in stunned silence and say, what is this great power? They're not doing what I would do. The grace that Christians have is amazing. This is their great faith. So either way we understand the original here, this implication remains. When life is tough, the Father's children, when we endure patiently, when we choose not our knee-jerk reactions, but to respond in an otherworldly way, grace abounds. Grace is present for us and through us. I have the worship team come forward. I just want to wrap up with, this story. It's really a footnote to what's happening to the Coptic Christians in Egypt. This is a news report from a week ago, not Friday, but a week ago Friday. A group of Coptic Christians were on their way to a church south of Cairo when another group of militants from the Islamic State of Libya opened fire on the bus. Just machine guns just opening fire on the bus. The driver of the bus was shot several times. He survived by playing dead, but he reported this after the attack, that after they peppered the bus with bullets, they got inside, and anyone who seemed to still be alive, they shot, including children, little children that were on the bus. It was just a horrific attack. When the attack was over, 30 Christians lie dead, 26 others were wounded. Amazing report of another passenger on the bus, 54-year-old woman named Nadia Shokri. Nadia reported this, that after the militants realized there were still some survivors, they demanded that the survivors either recite the Islamic creed and then choose to live as practicing Muslims or die. That was the choice the survivors on the bus were given. Shokri, 54-year-old Nadia Shokri, said, "We are Christians and we will die as Christians." Amazing stance. Her attacker then proceeded to shoot her 3 times. Shokri continued her report of the attack. "I begged my attacker to stop after he shot me the first 3 times, but he told me to shut up or he would shoot me in the heart." And Shokri then watched as the militants killed her husband, killed her 30-year-old son, and killed her 18-month-old granddaughter. 18-month-old, the youngest victim of the attack. And when it was all said and done, once again, national broadcast, Egyptian television, Shokri had this to say: "We forgive them. We forgive them, and I pray that God touches your hearts and changes you so that you will see the right path." Christians are made of steel. Christians are made of steel. I could never do what Christians do. How great is the forgiveness they have. This is their faith. How are we going to be? Whether we're taking bullets for the faith or we're just being misunderstood and misrepresented. How are we going to be? The Father says, continue to live properly. Continue to be honorable, no matter what. Be obedient, law-abiding, authority-honoring citizens, no matter what. Love the family, no matter what. Trust and worship and love the Father, no matter what. Be great employees, no matter what. And trust that grace abounds for you and through you, no matter what. All right, let's stand.